Yep. What's up, Mark?
All right, we're live. I can't believe this is actually going down.
Heck yeah.
All right. So I got to figure out just how to get the chat window popping up for me. All right, there we go. Jake. What's up, Jake? Man, haven't seen you in, 8 months? All right, so let's get started with the beer.
Yes.
So since this is our first one, I went with kind of a big beer today. Got 10 years from Anchorage, and it's like a 15% big imperial stout with coconut, vanilla beans, and cinnamon. So
Sounds bomb.
yeah. So I'll start off with a little intro. By the way, this is the LTG Project shirts. But Sho and I have been friends for probably 9 years now. I first started my entire kind of journey with cars on the Mazdaspeed platform, and that was back in 2009 when I bought my Speed 3 and basically started modding it immediately at that point. And from that point forward, it was about a year later that I blew it up for the first time. And that was back when basically nobody could make power on the Mazdaspeeds. Nobody knew why they couldn't make power. There was the wall, what everybody called the wall. And the reason my car blew up at that point in time was because there was a glitch where Cobb had released the access port for the Mazdaspeeds and access tuner, and had all these base maps and stuff like that, but they had just released flat foot shifting or no lift shift, and the problem was they didn't account for this huge lean spike that would happen after flat foot shift. And what did I do? Do the no lift shift, third to fourth, trying to get around a truck on the highway and grenade the motor. So that's kind of what got me really deep into my first DI turbo application. And then from there, started just building and tuning those over the next handful of years. Met Sho along the way. Ended up originally, I tuned I'm trying to think of the first setup I tuned on your Speed 3.
You tuned my first big turbo setup on the stock block on my Speed 3, so that was a 5858.
Yep. So 5858 stock block. This is where part of the reason I really wanted to do this and the overlap with the speeds and then now the LTGs is, we went so long from 2009, 10, 11, 12 really, with the speeds where everybody could throw the biggest turbo possible. They could build the engines, they could do all these things, and nobody could make more than 400 wheel horsepower, absolutely max, no matter what. And that was the wall. And, finally we figured out that it was fueling related. Like, you had to add auxiliary fueling, basically. Or the first thing that really came along was people realizing that they could do so with meth, which to a point I love it. I mean, I still love meth for a lot of reasons. And I think if you're going, 20, 25% over the stock fuel system, meth is pretty sufficient. If you don't have E85 in your area, meth is pretty sufficient, those kind of things. But, that was kind of the first breakthrough. And that's actually somewhere where the LTGs aren't even quite at yet. Everybody is still, if they're running meth, it's, one nozzle, maybe, 500, I don't even know actually what people are running, but like I'm trying to think of the conversion to like a Devil's Own nozzle, but like one nozzle gives a little extra headroom, but doesn't really do a ton, gives you the cooling and those things, but not really turn into the additional fueling. But just like the Mazdaspeeds, and what I'm trying to kind of bring here to the LTGs is, you can just add this auxiliary fueling, and not only can you make a ton of power, but you can make a ton of power safely and a ton of power on stock internals. And it's funny just watching with the LTGs right now, where it's like the same thing that we saw 10 years ago of like, man, people are popping motors stock, people are, this and that on, 300 horsepower, and people are blowing up, and these motors are glass and this and that. And now, and this is where I'll hand it over to you, now we got, for years and years now, we have guys making 450, 500 horsepower reliably on bone stock engines on the MZRs. Another engine that was like doomed at 320, 350 wheel horsepower at one point, and now it's reliable at 450 or more. And then there's you, who just pushes it to the absolute brink and still can't seem to break it. So yeah, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So a little background on me, I guess, is I bought my original Mazdaspeed MZR platform back in 2012 in the fall. And funny enough, the first person I met in the community was Jake. So, what's up, Jake? With that, I bought the car at that time just because it was unique. You didn't see a lot of them around here. And pretty much, I hopped on the forums, started reading, doing research. Jake offered to meet up one day and check out my car, see what kind of mods I had on it when I bought it, because I did buy it slightly modified. And that was the first taste I had into pretty much a highly modified Mazdaspeed. Jake at the time had, I think it was a GTX 3076 or something of that sort. He was about to put the 6-port kit on. And he basically, hey, here's a mod path to follow it, get a good tune, and you'll be fine. And that's pretty much what happened. So, I stuck around on a KO4 till, I think, 2014, that fall. That's where I went to the Precision 5858, which you tuned. We did that on the stock fuel system on a really low ethanol mix, just for fueling headroom. And then the following year, I think 2015, we built motor on that car with the 5858 still on meth. That turbo started blowing smoke, blowing rings out of the turbo seal, whatever. So went to a 5862. You tuned that on the dyno. I think it made high 400s, 480, 490, and then switched to a 6-port kit. We made low 500s on that, and then finally port injection first to return returnless on the 5862 on the built motor, and that car put down 575 on 5862 at the wheels at 35 pounds of boost. And then since then, that car is no longer. It's been parted out. So I picked up a Speed 6, and I was supposed to have the built motor ready for it last year. Some shit went down with the shop, so here I am pushing a stock block Mazdaspeed 6 with a Precision 6266. It's got a return style port injection system with a Hellcat pump. I turned it up yesterday, 32 pounds of boost for the first time. It should be well past 500 horsepower at this point. So that's basically it for me. I just, did a lot of research, learned from the right people, and then now, once you stop tuning in, I kind of took the reins over myself and get a little help from some people here and there, and here we are.
Nice. Yeah. It's been quite a journey with your cars. I still can't believe you ran the Speed 3 to 250,000 miles or whatever. That's pretty insane.
Yep, that built motor that's in that car. So we pulled it out of that car when it went to scrap. 85,000 miles. A guy in Cincinnati just bought it recently, so he just dropped it in his car. And we'll see if it'll make it to 100K. Almost all those miles are at 500 horsepower or above.
Yeah, and I think that's really, what I am working on here, on the LTG side is just the getting people's head around the fact that it's not it's not an engine issue. It's not even just necessarily a tuning issue, although there is with the LTGs, the stock tune is absolute garbage. But the biggest thing is it's a fueling issue. Your cars, once you added enough meth or once you added the aux fuel, you're opening up 100 wheel horsepower or more that you can make safely on the exact same internal components. So that's something that I've been working on, and I know just about everybody is waiting on me for that, and I'm doing everything I absolutely can. And Jonathan has let me know that so I was buying back since 2011 was when I started buying those RMR fuel rails. And for everybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about there, the sixth port, when we talk about that, it just means you have 4 normal DI injectors. Then you add 2 more port injectors. So overall you have 6 injectors, 6 port, okay? And those are basically installed into the cold pipe somewhere before the throttle body. So it's pre-throttle body injection. And this is usually where meth is also tapped to inject there. So they are very similar. The difference being a meth controller and a meth nozzle is not meant to be even close to a primary fuel source for any engine. You need an actual pulse width modulated injector. You need injector drivers. You need that control. So that's where, when you're getting into that area where you're talking 30%, 40%, 100% over what the DI system can produce, that you want to go to something like at least a 6-port system where you have real injectors, pulse width modulated, and you can really, even with a simple unit like the split second controller, you can really control the injection exponentially better than just with dumping a ton of meth via nozzles in. So it's been great, but I started buying those RMR rails way back in 2011, and every time I went back to buy another one, they were always there. And of course, I got one for my car Jonathan got one for his car. And Jonathan is my buddy who runs the Evo 9 based turbo on his car, is now going to the FP Red. That car is well into the mid 400 wheel horsepower range, and he's running the exact same kit. So we basically put this kit together and enjoy our cars last summer. Figure out kind of the tuning on the LTGs is exponentially more difficult than the tuning was on the MZRs. The Gen 5 ECUs on the GM platform are just they're just tricky. The way it's all set up, it's just not. There's a lot that you have to go into. There's a lot trying to hold you back. So where with the MZRs, we basically just had to figure out there was a load cap where you couldn't go over 2.0 load, and once we figured that out, easy to get around. With the LTG platform, with the Gen 5 GM PCMs, there's 20, 30, 40 load caps. There are so many tables in so many areas where once you get past one, you hit another one. Just the control strategy of that PCM is just entirely different. But anyway, so Jonathan and I install these on our cars. We get all the tuning issues worked out through last summer and everything. Through that time, I also then I developed the big turbo kits, and I started running that on my car. We get everything worked out. I'm ready to put together the actual kits for other people to buy for this platform, and I go to RMR, and what do you know? Not only are they sold out, but they have no plans of bringing those rails back at that point in time. And I went back and forth with them, emails over and over and over again since right before Thanksgiving last year. And they kind of strung me along, kept saying that they were going to make another run, they were going to do more, and then it would be no, with COVID, we're cut short right now, and we can't, do another run of these right now. And it kept going back and forth. Finally, I just, recently just gave up on that thought. I then went to Jonathan and I was like, we got to do these rails on our own. So he's got that design down. He already has the fuel rail stock coming in for those, designing the rest of the actual assembly. So that should be done, here in 2 weeks. And if you're a Mazdaspeed guy, you know exactly how long that is. But
hashtag 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, but they should legitimately be done in a reasonable amount of time, and honestly, it's going to be a better package because we're able to use the shorter injectors, which will fit better in a more compact spot, and we won't run into this issue again. I'm the whole reason that I kind of learned to do all of the things that I have on my car and now on others and multiple platforms and whatnot now is because I was tired of running into the issues that you just ran into with machine work and all that stuff where you're relying on other people for things that you can't do, and it's a bad feeling. It's a bad feeling, especially when you are trying so hard to put something out there for others. So we'll get this. It's taking longer than expected, but the 6-port kit will be coming, and it is essentially show exactly the same type of kit as what you had run, and eventually full PI will come, and all of that.
Good deal. And just in case you guys run into any manufacturing issues, I guess, right before we started this live session, I sent you a screenshot of there is another company making those dual injector rails too. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll check those out. I think I saw them at one point and they were overseas, and I think that might have been why I didn't immediately um, didn't immediately do that, but we'll see.
gotcha. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy thinking about, what was it, 2014? You guys did Jake's car on the 6266 with the 6 port and set the stock block record. And, auxiliary fueling, at least on the MZR. And now, you look at their little brother, the Focus STs and the RSs are using the same concept. So it's kind of weird to me to see the whole Cadillac Camaro platform with the 2-liter turbos not following that path yet. And you having to beat this into their skulls.
All right, show. So I'm a little delayed because apparently you have an echo going on, so I'm trying on my end to mess with every setting I can think of, and I think I got it at this point.
Oh, yeah, it's okay.
But yeah, so it was really weird to me, especially because you had the LNF platform, so you had the Cobalts and everything before this. So that's the last generation of these GM DI turbo cars and all of that, and that was they actually, I think, even before the MZRs used and before we developed any 6-port kits, like they had a 5th injector where they were running a single injector in the rail type of thing. And it's weird because nothing really ever came of that. There was no transition from that to the LTG. And looking at it, from what I can tell, is because the one thing that the LTG has that the MZR never had, and the EcoBoost now has some of, but it's still limited power potential and everything. Is so when I went to the LTGs, there is an aftermarket injector. There is an aftermarket performance injector that will get you to 500, 550-ish if you're going on 91 or 93 octane with a big enough turbo. You can't run E85 with it. I think the number right now on the Nostrum setup is 561. It's on a 6266 with 93 octane. They couldn't run any E85 on it because it just wasn't enough.
But that high pressure fuel pump that you need for it's what, like $1,600, and then another grand and a half for the injectors. I mean, that's pretty outrageous in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a total you get into the $3,500 to $4,500 range for that, and you're still limited at 550 wheel horsepower, and that seems like a lot.
Gas.
Right, on pump gas, and that seems like a lot for a lot of people. But you and I both know that as soon as you make 450, like you feel fast. Like you feel like you just went from a car that made 250 to the wheel to 450 to the wheel. It feels like you have a totally different car. Once you're at 450, like as soon as you cross over, I would say the 500 wheel horsepower mark, it's never enough. Like it's never enough from that point. So you never want to be limited by your fueling solution, especially if you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 for it.
Exactly. I mean, going back to my Speed 3, that car made upper 500, just low 600s by the time I got rid of it, and now going to low to mid 500 feels slow.
Yeah, which is crazy for a lot of people, to hear, but I mean, anybody who's been there completely understands it. And I think that probably takes us to, another point, that we were going to talk about, which is the turbo sizing. And this is another piece that was so weird for me, coming from kind of a really like developed platform that had been around for a long time to one that hadn't, is still to this day, and I think we'll be here for a little while. I have a big turbo on my car, and I put it in quotes because it's a 57 mil turbo. Like, it's not in relation to things I've even personally run. It's not even that big of a turbo.
Right.
But to people on the, people are looking at going to something that would be, more like an S3 in terms of a MZR,
Okay.
an S3 or maybe an S4. So we have some hybrid turbos that are being built that are in that S4 range, I would say, from BNR.
Mid 400 range, high 400 if that, like fully tapped out.
Right. And we haven't even proven, it hasn't even been proven yet, but that's what on paper they should make. But what people are really concerned with is the spool. It's the old, how fast can this turbo hit 20 psi? At what RPM does this turbo hit 20 psi? I don't want this to be laggy. How can I find another turbo that feels like a stock turbo but carries power to redline like I've never seen before, and so on and so forth. And there's, and you said it in one of your recent videos, there is this relearning of how you drive the vehicle, right? Like when we put a big turbo on the car, you relearn where your power band is, and just because your power band starts later doesn't mean that it's not much broader. And it's a really hard concept to get through to people and explain to people. And I don't know if part of that, with the LTGs is because it's easier right now and simpler to buy a say $1,500 bolt-on turbo, do nothing else to it. Don't have to worry too much about the fuel solution. You can add a little bit of meth, but you're never going to be making that top end power, which is where DI really falls apart. So it's a lot easier to go with the fast spooling turbo that'll make some more power and a shitload of torque. Whereas that will still require a built motor. I mean, it's the same thing that I've seen forever, which is, people want to run an inefficient setup as hard as possible because it's quote unquote easier or simpler to do, where you could completely skip the built motor if you want, which is really just relearn how you drive it and enjoy the way that it drives with a bigger turbo and more RPM to use.
Oh, for sure. And it's funny, like it's still going on in the MCR platform where I'll see people running, smaller big turbos, stuff that's 450, 475 wheel horsepower capable. And then, 1,000 miles after they installed it, the car blew up because it's lighting up so early, making that huge torque hit down low. Whereas, I'm at 18,000 miles on a 6266 on a 82,000 mile motor, and knock on wood, yes, it's going to probably blow up eventually, but made it a lot longer than a lot of other people have on smaller turbos.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Let me see if I can pull up that graph that you sent me as like an illustration for that.
If it works, because I'm on delay, let me know. I can kind of go over anything that you miss, or if you want me to cover whatever on it. I guess while we're waiting, I'm drinking a Twitchy Bitch from Arshay Brewing in Akron, Ohio. Buddy Dan sent it down here to Louisville for me, and it's a imperial aged stout on molten chocolate lava beans. Good old 9.25%. Pretty damn tasty.
Very nice. All right. So I know we're on a bit of a delay, but I think everybody should be able to see my graph at this point. So, let me know in 10 seconds if you're able to see the graph. But so what we're showing here is basically, and this I want to reiterate. I understand a lot of what we're talking about, and this graph, for instance, comes from a couple different Mazdaspeeds. I have been immersed in both of these platforms for a long time now, and it all applies. It all applies to both. It is dead on. The torque numbers that we'll see with the LTG being a 2-liter versus a 2.3. Yeah, those are a little bit different. The size of the turbo that you need to make a certain amount of power on the 2.0 versus the 2.3, that's a little bit different. But all of the an article on this that I posted on the LTG project page. That's it's not the turbo sizing guide, but it's in there somewhere where I have a similar graph that has basically stock turbo, a medium-sized turbo, and then a big turbo, and kind of each of the different kind of levels of a build that I personally suggest, and basically why. And what you can see here, the why is pretty clear, right? You get a stock turbo that, sure, this lights up quicker, and you're seeing peak torque by 35 to 3600 RPM on a LTG. It'd be similar because typically on the MZR you're actually holding back the spool and the torque as much as possible on some stock turbo cars, because the stock turbos will light up even faster and create a lot of compressive force on rods, and cause big problems. But so you see this, and you have this nice range. It looks like a big fat torque curve for a stock turbo car. But that torque curve in reality, right? Like you're holding peak torque from, say, 3600 RPM until 4600 RPM, and then you are falling, right? And you can negate some of this fall on a stock turbo with E85, a lot of it in some cases, because you can run a lot more timing up top where the turbo's inefficient, but you can use the timing to kind of bring that up. But at the end of the day, a stock turbo curve is always going to look the same. A stock turbo curve is going to have peak torque well before the 52 cutover. It's going to have peak torque well before where peak horsepower is, and then you're going to see this type of A curve every single time. And people think that what they really want is a curve that starts out the exact same way, lights up really fast, and then they think they can just hold it, all the way to redline. Well, that cannot happen on a stock like turbo. A stock like turbo housing, it cannot happen. What Show is showing here in his graph is what you can do, though, is you put a big ass turbo. This is a 6266. This is going from a KO4, which is tiny, to a 6266, and torque meets the exact same amount at 300. So your peak of 300 wheel torque on a stock turbo car, the 6266, the giant turbo, meets that torque amount 200 RPM after the KO4 made peak torque. So it's not that big of a difference at all. And even if it was, what show I'm sure does now, and like what I do with my car being, a 57 S257, is I'm not starting my pulls when I'm actually trying to just go fast on the street, get on the highway, do whatever. I'm not starting that at 2,500 or 3,000 RPM. I know that if I start my pull at 3,500 RPM, that within 400 RPM, I'm going to be making more torque than I want to be on a stock engine. So then you start doing that, and you say, okay, I'm just gonna know that I'm cruising at 3,500 RPM instead of 2,500 RPM before I'm kind of ready to get into it. And then from that spot, then you see this area under the curve. This is a perfectly flat torque curve for 3,000 RPM basically, which is a huge increase over the torque curve on the small turbo. So it's such a misconception that you need to keep this stock-like spooling and stock-like basically feel of a turbo where you can get that instant torque hit. You don't need to keep that. There is another way to drive the car that is absolutely fantastic and enjoyable and can produce a lot more power, especially when you talk about on a stock engine. When your goal is to make a lot of power on a stock engine, like, you need to have that smooth torque curve. You need to have that come in a controllable way, and then you can, with the right fueling, you can then take that and pull it all the way to red line and beyond. I'm immediately revving. I'm revving my car bone stock engine, stock long block to 7,300, 7,500 RPM. I have plans to go higher, but with the clutch issues that I've had, aka having a stock clutch still at 80,000 miles and a over 400 wheel horsepower car, I just haven't been able to do enough tuning to fine tune things. Really above $7,000, 7,200 is where I have made peak so far. But I think I'll be easily able to pull through 7,500 on a bone stock long block from everything I've seen with the cam grinds and valve springs. And then I would love to also do a good set of cams and springs on an otherwise bone stock engine, and with the 2-liter take it to $8,000, 8,500, and kind of see how things like it at that point.
Yeah, and kind of going back to what you were saying with, no one's doing actual pulls on the street aside from logging from a low RPM. I did it today for shits and giggles, where I started in 4th gear at 3,500 RPM, and it took 400 RPM, 500 RPM max for that 62, 66 to really light up. And had we been in Mexico purposes, I would have been down even another gear and probably brake boosting. So, at the end of the day, I don't need a hairdryer tiny turbo to light up like that, when I could just be down a gear or two and be in the right range for that turbo to actually do work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how, honestly, I'm going to, well, I do. The only way to get it through to people is to help produce more cars this type of way, so that people can see how well it works, that more people have accessibility to that type of setup, and then they can see for themselves. And once there's enough out there, then that's why you see, you see a lot of people, the MZR community is huge compared to the LTGs, especially at this point, but you do at least see more people going, when they go big turbo, they're going bigger turbo. There aren't near as many. I mean, I'm talking right now, we have, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, we probably have 5 cars definitely less than 10 cars with an LTG and a truly big turbo. They're just it's not remotely close right now.
Well, especially now that finally there's stock flange options to where people don't have to spend crazy money on, precision or, tile V-band manifolds. Cork Sport's done a couple bolt-on turbos now that are 700 horsepower capable almost. So it takes a pretty large turbo to do that. So I think we'll see more of that here now as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the thing that kind of sucks for the LTG community is our stock turbo is small. Like, it's little, and it's this little 16G housing that you can't, unless we had somebody, which it may be a good option to look toward, but unless we have somebody who's making new housing, so like Cork Sport, like BNR when he went to the S5 and beyond, who's truly manufacturing a bigger housing but with a stock flange, unless we get to that on the LTGs, it's just never going to happen, because right now, we're putting I think the biggest turbine wheel that can be technically fit into a ported out LTG turbo turbine housing is like a 47 millimeter turbo. So we're getting that, with a 57 millimeter, 55 millimeter, compressor wheel. So you're definitely getting an increase there, but it's not efficient at all the way that you want to be. So with that said, that's why I have focused, as much as I've been able to, on putting together like an actual full turbo kit, manifold, turbo, everything like that, where you get everything you need all in one package. And it's would it be I won't say easier, because swapping out my entire turbo kit versus swapping out one stock turbo, I could do 10 of my full turbo kits in the time that it takes to swap out one stock turbo for another bolt-on stock turbo. It's just the way that everything fits, it's that much easier. But it would be less expensive for sure overall to be able to do a bolt-on, even if that's a $1,800 bolt-on turbo, $2,000 bolt-on turbo. Yeah, like a full turbo kit is going to be $3,200 on the low end, depending on what turbo you're choosing, which would be roughly what my 257 setup would be in that range. But when a lot of people, when they're trying to do the comparison, they're not looking at the fact that they already have a catless downpipe, because that was a natural bolt-on that they use with the stock turbo, and they already have an intake, and so there's all these things that they already have that a full turbo kit will also come with. So if you take those into account on your bolt-on turbo and say, okay, well, I had my $1,800 turbo, I still had my $400 downpipe, I still had my $300 intake, and now you're getting right up there to the same amount, and you're dealing with, in our case, because of the housing options, you're dealing with a turbo kit that's not nearly as capable as something like the 257. Now again, that's the 257's on the low end. It's a fantastic turbo though for less than $900. I mean, you can't beat it. You can't beat it.
No, those BorgWarner turbos make power too. So.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. It's killing me that I haven't been able to turn mine up a little bit more. because of the clutch, and I'm holding it back as much as I've had to. But soon. I mean, I have the clutch here. Jake, if you're still on, is going to help me do the clutch probably in like a couple weeks, and then we can turn it up some. But that turbo at between 22 and 23, 24 pounds, it makes 430 is a very conservative estimate of where we're at right now, at 7,000 RPM. And I think what a lot of people aren't realizing too, and I've tried to do a couple different write-ups on this with DI versus PI and such, but where DI really falls apart is at RPM, because your window of fuel, your fueling window is going to keep collapsing shorter and shorter and shorter, and you can't make up for that other than bigger injectors or more fuel pressure. You have to basically have a way to inject more fuel in a shorter amount of time, and that's just, it's not a realistic approach. It's the same reason that OE manufacturers have gone to dual injection setups. I think the FA20, with the BRZs and FRS were probably the first one that were doing it, where they said, okay, we'll keep this, we'll keep this DI. There's a lot of great benefits from DI, but carbon buildup is shit, and on top of that, you have such a finite window and framework that you're working within. So it's just a scenario where people just need to realize. I've had people come to me over and over again. The LTG can't make power up top. The LTG can't make power up top. Like, it was designed that way. It's because the exhaust ports are small. Oh, the exhaust ports are small, and the the runners are short, and and on and on and on. And I've tried over and over again to say, this is not an LTG issue. This is not an engine component issue. Even though I can't stand our stock exhaust manifold, which is hilarious, it's not even a stock manifold issue for the most part. Like, this is a fueling issue.
100%.
We are seeing where, on stock turbo cars, on E50, are running into 7 milliseconds. Trying to carry 7 milliseconds, you have no chance. So on the MZRs, on the speeds, you would get, that would be where you would see over 100% duty cycle, and you would get misfires and all kinds of shitty combustion and whatnot. Now on the LTGs, there's more internal PCM logic to not allow any power to be made if your injector duty cycle is that high. There's full out limits, hard limits on how high your duty cycle can be before they will start doing everything under the sun to limit power. Close the throttle, add up to 10 degrees of false KR, knock retard. There's all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, if you just lower that pulse width, if you lower that duty cycle, then your ability is unlimited with the RPM. And how do you lower pulse width at RPM? How do you lower duty cycle at RPM? Well, you lower the pulse width, and to lower the pulse width, you need to make the PCM think that it needs to inject less fuel. So right now on my car, my average injector duty cycle, or I'll go with pulse width because duty cycle is calculated totally differently on the LTGs. So my average injector pulse width at 7,000 RPM on my car is 3 milliseconds. So okay. I am basically, I'm right now around on a semi-calibrated math, my cap is at about 250 grams per second, and I think I don't know what you're running for a cap.
Which I'm going to see if I can share that from my end here. But go ahead.
But yeah, so I'm basically saying, to my ECU, I'm saying only inject what fuel you would need for 250 grams per second worth of airflow. And that keeps everything happy because it forces that pulse width to be low. It forces it to be right in the range where I get fantastic actual combustion events where I don't have any issues, with fuel, spraying into an open exhaust and things of that nature. So the entire DI system is happy, and then you add the PI on top of it. My PI system right now isn't even working hard, but it's at least, it's doing most of what's needed, where the DI system has to do, basically nothing. I mean, I think, my duty cycle. So there's a rough limit of 30% duty cycle on the LTGs. Now, the difference with that and the MZRs is the MZRs calculate duty cycle basically like a typical engine, where you have a full 720 degree possible amount of injection for an entire engine cycle, where the LTGs, they actually calculate it based on the injection window just being basically before the exhaust valve is open. So that's why you get down to that 30%. But so at that 30% spot, if you hit 30 or try to go above it, you start getting throttle closure, false KR. Even if you get rid of the knock, it won't add timing anymore. It won't add boost based on your wastegate duty cycle table. All these things. So you have to do something to bring that pulse width way down, and that's easily done through some sort of PI solution.
Hey, so I just messaged you a screenshot of the log. I don't know if you can share it, but if not, I'll just explain it anyway.
Yeah, let me look for it.
But basically, like Mark was talking about, I have my DI capped at 291 grams a second. So that's flatlined right around 3.8 volts. And the port injection is actually starting to spray much earlier than that as a blend. And, 3.2 volts slightly earlier. But I'm able to keep, and hopefully we can show this so you guys can get an idea, but I'm able to keep basically 69-70% injector duty cycle on the DI side from the time my car's pushing 20 to 22 pounds all the way to the 7,200 RPM rev limiter where it's hitting 31, 32 PSI. And with that, we can get into this discussion later on because these injectors are overkill for the power I'm making, but I'm running a Hellcat 525 liter per hour pump with Bosch 2200 cc injectors, and up top at at my rev limit, those injectors are at 46%, 47% duty cycle as well.
And Joe, I am going to be able to share that, so give me 1 second.
Okay.
All right, you should be good to go.
Okay. So I can't see it exactly perfect there, but if you look at the mass airflow grams per second column, you should be able to see we're at 3.8 volts, roughly around there. You'll see the mass airflow caps out at 2.91 or 291 point whatever grams per second. And if you look at, I don't know if Mark, you can hover your cursor over the injector duty cycle column, but it's pretty much holding 6970 from, what is that, $5,000 up.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
So at that point, ideally I would like the duty cycle on the DI side just a hair higher, 80 to 85%, just because it is decent for combustion purposes and stuff like that. But with the 2200s in my PI system being so large, the commanded pulse width is so low. They're I maybe two milliseconds up top at 7,000 RPM. It's ridiculous. But the whole idea there is neither fueling system is strained, and the car is moving well over 600 crank horsepower of air, up top on a bone stock engine.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy to see that, and you know, it's interesting because for me, this has become how I look at tuning cars in general, because these are the types of cars that I've always done. But there's so many people who haven't heard of something like this, which is just nutty to me. But so yeah, I have the picture back up now, and I keep having to basically like go back and mute my end when you're talking and vice versa. So
Oh shit, okay.
no, you're fine. But yeah, so I'll kind of just reiterate what Show was saying here is, you see, let me zoom in on this a little bit more. But you see at 5882, we have this 291.14, 291.71 we'll say is the cap. So essentially what that is, and I did put an article on the LTG project page about this that had a lot of good, kind of screenshots and views on how this is done. But he essentially is capping the amount of fuel that the ECU sees. Or the amount of airflow he's setting at 291 grams a second. And the reason he's doing that is because he has a target here in his mind of around 70% duty cycle for the injectors. So you see here it's just riding 69.589, right around 70% duty cycle. To flip that into the LTG language, what we would probably see, depending on the year of your car, because I've seen it read out differently on different year LTG models. If you're an earlier model with the earlier PCM versus a later model with the later PCM, but this would equate to roughly 20% duty cycle is what I would see on my car in the same scenario. But you see what he's done is he's taken that desired perfect maximum duty cycle for the DI system, and he said, okay, what airflow do I hit when that duty cycle is read? And that's around 290 grams a second. Okay, well, I'm going to take my math table and I'm going to flatline that at that 291. That's going to keep me at 70% or below for my duty cycle on the DI system the rest of the run, all the way to 7,300 RPM. And I'll make up for the rest of the curve that I need with my PI injectors. So that's really, that's really what the theory is behind tuning all of this. And different tuners, do this differently as well. There's definitely tuners who tune it more like a meth setup, where you would have, you wouldn't do a full flat line. You would do percentage kind of decreases as you go.
Bring the curve down.
To bring the curve down, still filling in the rest of the amount with the PI injectors, but I personally, I like doing it this way. There's a multitude of reasons why, but just like any other tuning related topic, there's a million ways to skin a cat, and that's just the way that I prefer to tune those.
You keep in mind too, that's on a pretty high ethanol mix. The Speed 6 has a 16-gallon tank. I'm doing 9 gallons to 9.5 gallons of E85 to 6.5, 7 gallons, 93 octane. So it's a little over at E50 mix, somewhat closest to E60. So if I was running a lower percentage, I could probably scale that MAF flatline up a little higher.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think, and when I was talking about mine being at, in the 250 grams a second range, I made the mention of a decently scaled MAF, because I've been doing a ton of different tests with MAF housings in different sizes and tuning the LTG. So what's interesting with that is you have a 5-volt sensor on an MZR, 0 to 5 volts. All you have to do to get more headroom is to get a bigger housing, and then the amount of airflow that sensor sees at, let's say, a median of 2.5 volts, the amount of airflow that the sensor sees on a 2.5-inch housing versus the amount of airflow it sees on a 4-inch housing, very, very different. So you can really, you can just keep increasing that MAF diameter and can grow the amount of airflow that your MAF can actually see. Now it's essentially the same for the LTG. The difference is, and this is something that I had no idea of when I actually when I first started tuning these, is so our MAF sensors are based on hertz. So we don't have a standard 0 to 5 volt based MAF sensor. And what I did, before I realized that, was I was just like, all right, I'm going to put a 3.5-inch intake on this. I'm going to scale the MAF. I know all the calculations. I'm going to scale the MAF by what ends up turning out to from 2 3/4 to 3.5 is a 58% or some scale of to that magnitude. And I'm going to do that, and then the car's going to run great. And then I'll do a couple tweaks. I'll do some tweaks, and I will, kind of get everything perfectly in line. But that's all I'll need to do. And you know what? Maybe because we have, also a volumetric efficiency table, maybe I'll do that too to even make it more perfect. But that's all I need to do. So that is not how it works with these at all. And I have gone a year and a half at this point with trying to tune on a 3.5-inch intake, and it's not going to happen. So
Yes.
There's still some more things I could do, and the car runs 90% fine. Where it has issues are idle and very low load. And the reason is, so we can actually run probably up to based on the, on paper, we can probably run up to 650 to 700 wheel horsepower on the stock sized MAF housing, because for us, hertz wise, we just have a lot more. The range of our sensor is a lot wider. Now the
Gotcha.
problem, that's great. I mean that's great because most people never have to change the diameter of their MAF. The problem is you can't put a 2 3/4 inch intake on a 6266 that has a 4-inch inlet for the compressor. So we need to come up with some way around that, and that's actually what I'm working on right now. Actually just got a Treadstone delivery, which is one of my favorite deliveries. So I got this box from Treadstone, which is full of aluminum piping and MAF flanges and blow-off valve flanges and all of those things. And the reason being, what we're going to go to in my next test that I really do believe will work best at this point is I'm going to make a blow-through setup. So I'm going to do the MAF on the cold side, which is already in my 6-port kit, is a 2 3/4 inch piping from the throttle body. So it's the exact same diameter as the throttle body on down, so 2 3/4. And so that's also basically the stock MAF housing diameter. So we're going to take that, we're going to go blow through, so you can run a 5-inch intake if you want it, and it won't affect the MAF at all. And what that'll also do is on the LTGs that are extremely sensitive on the kind of airflow calculation side, we'll also be able to then run VTA blow-off valves without any problems, which has been something that's been a pain in the ass to this point. It's not so bad on the manual transmission cars like mine, because you can pretty much tune for it because you have slower shifts. But what we found is that, and it was Cooper's Camaro who found this, who's the biggest LTG tuner out there. Basically what he found was on the stock, on the cars that are automatic transmission that are running any type of VTA blow-off valve. He was doing a test on I think it was a Turbo Smart dual port, so it was like a 50-50. But what he found was that every time it would vent and see that rich spike, what the computer would try to do would be compensate for that by pulling out fuel, right? Because it saw that it was rich. But the problem being, then it hits the next gear and very quickly, and it was staying lean then for up to twice as long as the rich spike was, which is a bad thing. So this going blow through will fix all of that. Won't have any issues. Anybody will be able to run a blow off valve that wants to, and if you swap to a big turbo, you'll be able to run any intake you want, the most efficient size without upsetting the MAF at all. And I'll share my screen this time on this because I'll pull up kind of what this looks like in HP tuners and how different it is from what you would see like in your in ATR. So give me once.
I mean, that's hilarious, just you talking about it, because the whole MTR thing is you can't tune for a blow-off valve because you just expect either a rich shift on lift or you flat foot shift, and you don't have to worry about anything. So hearing you talking about actually tuning for a blow-off valve is quite interesting.
Yeah, and I still, I've had a tile on my car this entire time, running a draw-through MAF on my intake, whatnot. I ran it with, when I was exclusively speed density tuned as well. It worked better then. I was able to keep it from going as rich on shifts. But either way, on a manual transmission car, if you tune the MAF and the volumetric efficiency in close enough, you'll be fine on manual transmission car. I've never seen a problem with when I hit the next gear, it stays lean for a period of time because it went rich on the shift. I've never seen that. I think the big difference here is, you know, having those auto trans, which I have no experience with.
Right.
That's
the shift like that.
Exactly, and that's stuff that I didn't think about at all. But all right, so let me share my screen now, and I'll go to I'll go into HP Tuners. So this is in HP Tuners, and what you'll see here, so this is a good, actually, this is a really good kind of illustration of what Show's graph showed, which is kind of the flat line. So my flat line's actually at 233, and anybody who knows me understands why that is. But yeah, so that flat line is at 233. But really, the reason that I brought this up is to show, you know, this is so we don't have volts here. So this isn't a, you know, 1 volt, 2 volt, up to 5 volt system. This is up to basically 16,000 hertz. And what that does is, what we've seen is my car on what it's making now, I may reach into this, and Jonathan's the same. I think we're into right around the 10.2 to 10.5 range hertz wise. We have a lot of headroom, a lot of headroom for that. So there's no reason to go up in MAF diameter for quite a while, power wise. And even once you do need to go up in MAF diameter, you don't need to bump up to 3.5 or 4 inches right away. You could probably go from, you know, 2 3/4 to 3 inches and add another 100 wheel horsepower worth of airflow readings with the frequency. And the real problem that, you know, that's happened with my car, and why I've figured out that it's not an efficient way to do it, to put the MAF in a draw through setup with a 3.5 or 4 inch intake, is a stock MAF car. You're going to be idling somewhere in this probably 24 to 2700 hertz range. You have a lot more ability to, you know, tweak things in that range, rather than with my car. I'm idling in the 750 to 900 hertz range, and there's just not enough. You know, there's not enough adjustability there when you're going between. You're trying to tell the ECU to predict either 2 grams a second, either 2.04 grams a second, or 2.08 grams a second. There's not enough resolution there to make it work. So that's kind of it's a cool thing that we can essentially run a stock MAF housing up to 700 horsepower. But it's an annoying thing that me, being a dumbass and just assuming that it was on a 5 volt sensor like anything else, that I would just throw a 3.5 inch intake on, scale the MAF, and we'd be fine. And that's just not at all how it works.
Right. I mean, you know, in comparison, 3.5 inch intake on the speeds is, you know, 600 to 620 horsepower capable, 4 inch 800 horsepower capable. So to see that difference is pretty wild.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, but no, it's cool. I'm excited to get this get this setup figured out. I'm tired of the endless hours in the driveway of me trying to tune my car at idle. Um, it's I never want to do it another minute. So that'll be nice, and then I think really be it'll be nice for everybody who the amount of blow off valve questions that are asked. What blow off valve do you run? Can I run a VTA blow off valve? So and so. It's the same amount of like what oil do I use or what spark plug should I get and what gap questions. And I would
Yep.
love to be able to just say, here you go. You want to run, VTA. Here's your piping kit, you know, and I send it to you. So that's while I'm waiting for the fuel rail assemblies to be finished up. That's what I'll be working on. Um, so that'll be a fun little project.
Oh yeah.
All right, Jake, do you have any other questions? Yeah, Tyler. So Tyler asked if oil being a big thing for these cars, and it is. So, what's funny is, number one, we get this. There's enough dumb questions that could be solved by Google or solved by on our LTG project page, like on Facebook. There's 15 saved documents that answer most of these things, or just searching within the group. They're spark plug gap. I mean that's a tough one, but no, we get that stuff all the time. But as far as oil goes, so oil's like a huge thing with the LTGs, because the low speed pre-ignition that was probably people want to say it was like the number one killer of the LTGs when they first came out. Um, the tune is probably right up there with it. What I've seen on stock tunes from the factory.
Hey, at least your guys know what low speed pre-ignition is. Shit.
Right. So, we run anything that's Dexos 2. I run Mobile 1 full synthetic in mine. I was really sad to have to let go of my treasured Rotella T6 that I loved, that I loved for most of my life. But no, it's I don't know. I think there's a lot of factors, but yeah, you got to run good oil. What do you run now? I know you run the blue stuff, right?
Yeah, it's Smurf juice. It's Tribodyne. I don't know. It's some crazy shit. It's expensive as hell. 5W40. But everything that's come back, so they don't have the Dexos 2 or SN Plus or API certification, but the chemical composition meets all those certifications. So first time I ran that oil, I actually sent it off to what's that guy? Blackstone Labs that does the oil analysis, and they sent it back. It had super crazy high amounts of zinc and the appropriate levels of moly and calcium and sodium and all that stuff. So I've been running that ever since. But it's funny that you bring that up, because being an admin on some of the Mazdaspeed pages, we've set up approval questions saying, do you know what kind of oil you need to use? And do you understand that if you ask what oil you need to use, you'll be banned? And, this platform has been out since 2006, and it's kind of sad that people are still asking these questions. Kind of hilarious.
Oh man, that is funny. That's really funny. That's honestly that's a good idea. That's like the amount of spark plug questions that I've seen. It's right up there too. It's like, how many times can it be answered that you want? And it's very similar spark plug recommendations, like ITV 24s, 22s or 24s, gapped at 26 to 28, depending on what you're running. Obviously, bigger stuff. Well, nobody's really running anything that needs a tighter gap, but some of the smaller stuff could be 30,000s, but the amount of times that stuff gets asked is like unreal. And it's either that or I run. This is a whole, we could get into this for an hour on its own, but I don't run the ITVs. I run the 6510s, the LTR,
NGKs,
the NGKs that are similar heat range.
Yeah, this is the same thing I run in my speed. It's the one step colder for us.
All right. Well, I don't know if I have anything left. I think that's about all I can come up with. We went an hour plus. No, Jake, we can't work on your car. And the orange, no orange liquid. David, I don't know what oil you use. Sho, do you know what oil?
What, me?
No, you said you use the Tribidine.
Yep.
So, I don't know. I might have to look into that. But you said it's super expensive, right? I don't need to get crazy on this.
It's like $72 a gallon. It's pretty outrageous.
Yeah, so that's going to be a hard pass for my my car. $72 a gallon, man. Until I can get my car running full E85 now and paying $2 a gallon of gas instead of $3.50 a gallon that I'm paying right now, I'm not spending any other money on my car.
Yeah, no, that's the next move for me is trying to go full corn, but I gotta wait till I bring my daily down here. When I moved down here to Louisville, I didn't bring it, so I'm just rocking the speed right now.
Isn't that crazy though that you can, and this is also what I try to tell people a lot is like you are dailying a big turbo stock engine speed, like,
yep.
and you, I mean, you're really pushing it, but you
and I beat the shit out of the car.
But you still, you do the things that you're supposed to do. You run $75 a gallon oil, and you keep your plugs looking nice, and you honestly, I think going watt at least once a day is like whenever you drive it keeps an engine healthy, and especially when you're able to run aux fueling, because then you're keeping the valves clean, you're doing everything that you need to do to keep everything looking fresh and good to go. And when you tune it right, when you have the right efficient setup that has a nice smooth torque curve that just carries out for days, you'll be fine.
No doubt, because I mean, like, look, this car, I picked it up with 57,000 miles on it last February. It had the variable valve timing done at 40,000 miles back in 2014, and that was the last time the intake valves were cleaned. I had the manifold off in December, and the valves are spotless. So definitely beating the shit out of it with having port injection helps.
Damn. Yeah, that's crazy. I can't believe that I put 50. What did I put on my car this year? So from March to March, I put 40,000 miles, about 40,000 miles on my car from March of last year to March of this year. And the last 20 has been with a big turbo, with the 6-port kit. Yeah, It's crazy. And the stock clutch. I did a video last week maybe, one of the unboxing videos when I did the clutch that I finally bought. But like, I joked about the fact that I went with a big turbo to save the stock clutch. But that's really what happened. I was in a car with we were like loaded 4 or 5 deep in my car going to Michigan. So it was like me, Chris, Jonathan, Jared, and we were trying to get. This was 2+ years ago, and we're like getting on the freeway in Michigan, and the clutch just to the moon, like RPM to the moon, right? And that was way back then on a stock turbo. I think at that time I even had put my stock exhaust back on the car and stuff. Or it was before I built the exhaust for it, one of the two. And I'm like, shit, like I'm gonna have to replace this clutch like now. And here I am, 2.5 years later, and I've been rocking this for another 40,000 miles, 50,000 miles on the stock clutch, and now 20K with a big turbo, making a lot of power. But there's a big difference between what we basically have in a 16G, just as and I was holding it back. Like, how I tune these cars. I was holding it back, and still there's only so much you can do when even at 3,500 RPM you're getting that torque hit of a little turbo, and it just breaks that friction enough to just start the slip. Whereas with the way that the big turbo runs, even as it starts to slip, you're still pulling because it never has that hard, just, that break in friction.
Yeah, and that's what's hilarious to me is, this car's got 82,000, almost 83,000 miles on it now. It's also still on the stock clutch. So just to be able to prolong the life without having that hard torque hit down low. This car's not making 350 pound-feet of torque till well after 4,000 RPM now. Staying well within the limits of the stock clutch as well as far as torque capacity. So it cracks me up that, people that running smaller turbos blow through a clutch in no time, and this car's making over 500 on a stock clutch still.
Yeah, it's just a different, it's a shift in mindset, and it's hard to get people on board with those things. I understand that when manufacturers come out with these cars and they say, okay, here's what we did. We created this car that will make basically not sound like it has a turbo and not feel like it has a turbo, because it's going to be 2200 RPM. It's going to hit like a freight train, and like people go with that and like, okay, this is the car I bought, this is how it should work. But if you think outside of the box and change that mindset a little bit, you can make so many stock parts last longer. Engine, clutch, transmission, differentials, on and on and on. If you take some of that stress off of those components just through tuning, and the only thing that you need as an additional part, to be able to do that is a bigger turbo and auxiliary fueling of some sort.
Yep.
And I'm not a meth hater at all, and I know a lot of people LTG wise probably think that I'm a meth hater because I do push PI injectors being the answer, because yes, it is. If you have access to E85, like if you can get corn readily, and you want to eventually someday make more than 450 wheel horsepower, you should just don't even ever buy the meth system and just look for the 6-port, because you're going to end up there. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I'll be the meth hater. I mean, take a look at some cylinder walls after they've run a significant amount of meth for any sort of time. That's all I got to say.
Or take a look at the number of heads that have had, I'll say, troughs cut through them
Mhm.
by very, very hot methanol during shifts and things
Yep.
of that nature.
Or
I don't-
the
I mean-
amount of pump and check valve and solenoid failures you have to deal with and replacing all that shit every few months.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm right there with you.
Port injection, I mean, I clean my injectors every 40,000 miles, and that's about it. So easy.
Yeah, it really is. And then you're not dealing with the quick disconnect lines that come with most of the kits that always fail. You know, the lines that I'm using, for instance, on my 6-port kit, you know, they're nice black braided PTFE lines for any fuel whatsoever. And so I'll make this clear too. You could run a secondary tank with methanol in it and use an injector that is okay with methanol. And you could inject methanol as your auxiliary fueling. That's fantastic if you want to do that too. For a long time on the Speed, I ran 93 octane in my main tank, and I ran a secondary tank completely that had ethanol in that secondary tank. And then, you know, as my power increased, my ethanol percent increased. So I got more octane as my power requirement, you know, as the octane requirement rose, it injected more octane is kind of how I set up the system. So it's definitely not like a methanol hating thing. Like, I don't hate methanol as a fuel at all. It's amazing. There's a reason Red Demon can run a damn near 6-second pass on a 4-cylinder. You know, it's because they can run 80 pounds of boost or more, you know, on a fairly high compression engine because they have a fueling in methanol that can support it. But it's the fact that you are putting the life of your engine into a nozzle, basically a hose, basically a water hose, and you know, and it's just don't do it. Just don't do it. I say, you know, I thought about it the other day, and I was saying 20-30% max over what your DI system can produce. You know, use it for what it's intended for, which is cooling, which is octane, and a little bit of fueling. You can definitely do that, because if you have a fail, yes, you'll run lean for a minute, but it probably won't be enough to cause a catastrophic failure. When you get to where we're running, you know, I mean, so you're flowing probably 600 grams a second worth of actual 550 grams a second worth of actual airflow is flowing through your engine, right? You're fueling more than basically half of your fueling is coming from your secondary injectors. If you don't want to put your faith into a meth system that's out there. You just don't.
No. And to give you an idea, you know, my split-second controller is the one that was on Jake's car before he parted it out. That's been 4 or 5 years since then. And the injector and manifold were originally on your car, then Jake's, then Miguel's before I got it. So, I mean, for failure rate's pretty low.
All right. I think we can probably wrap it up. This was fun. We'll have to do it again.
Oh, yeah.
Some technical difficulties, but I mean, that's obvious because, you know, I'm only an actual IT professional and have no idea how to run any technology. But no, it was a good time. We'll do it again, and yeah, it's good talking to you. Even though now I'm in Kentucky.
Yeah, try to come visit when you can.
Yeah, no, I will. I got to get down for the Bourbon Trail without a doubt. So.
For sure.